is going on, everybody? What is going on? The Catch fam, my name is John Dawson, and in today's video, we will be breaking down 5 must-start wide receivers moving into Week 8 of the 2023 fantasy football season. If you guys are new to the channel, this is all we do here all year round. Free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. If you guys are into that, be sure to subscribe on the way in. But more importantly, please drop any comments down below. Anything that you guys need moving into Week 8, starts, sits, waivers, trades. What wide receivers are you guys starting this week? Whatever it may be, let me know, and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Without further ado, let's hop into today's video. All right, number 1 overall, I've got Adam Thelen. You may have forgotten about him because he was on bye in Week 7. He's going up against the Texans in Week 8. Listen, it's not the best matchup. The Texans have been a pretty good unit against opposing wide receivers, but man, I would not be worried whatsoever. I mean, the pattern for Adam Thelen has been great, except for, Week 1 was a dud. But other than that, 15 or more fantasy points in the next 5 games. 20 or more fantasy points in 4 of those 5 games. He scored 4 touchdowns in 4 of those 5 games as well. I'm not worried about Adam Thelen in any way whatsoever. You shouldn't be. The pattern's been great until we see this ceiling start to lower. There's no reason to panic here. We're going to see a little bit of a matchup between rookie quarterbacks and Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. I think this is going to be a good game for the Panthers. They're at home. Listen, this offense hasn't been amazing, but they have stayed in games, and they've gotten a lot of garbage time points. And like I said, Adam Thelen, he's really a wide receiver that we are starting no matter what. But I know a lot of you guys drafted him at the very end of your drafts, maybe even got him off the waiver wire. So he's probably your wide receiver 4 or 5, maybe even your wide receiver 6 on your roster. Guys, don't think twice about it. Adam Thelen is in your starting lineup every single week, and especially here in Week 8. Except I'm going to talk about Chris Olave, and for the purpose of these videos, I mean, we don't really talk about, Tyreek Hills or Amon-Ra St. Brown's, right? And Chris Olave might be in that kind of tier, maybe not that exact tier, but a guy that you start every week and don't think twice about it. But lately, I feel like there's been a lot of panic around Chris Olave, especially after the little debacle on Thursday Night Football between Derek Carr and Olave. He's coming off of a game where he had 12.7 fantasy points, but he had 15 targets in this game. He had 10 targets the week before. Between weeks 4 and 5, a low ceiling at 1.4 and 9.2 fantasy points in those 2 games. Dealing with an injury or two, whatever it may be. There's just a lot of panic in the fantasy community around Chris Olave, and I absolutely think he needs to stay in your starting lineups, not just in Week 8, but in the next 3 weeks. He gets the Colts, the Bears, the Vikings. These are all teams that have played really poorly against the wide receiver position. So especially in full PPR formats, there's no reason to think that you should bench Chris Olave. I think he's going to bounce back, and he hasn't even been that bad in the last 2 weeks. But like I said, you're panicking around him, thinking about starting other players who've been performing well on your bench over him. Don't do it. Leave him in your starting lineup. Chris Olave is going to be just fine. He's still a must-start wide receiver moving into Week 8. All right, next up, I'm going to talk about Garrett Wilson, another player who was on bye week in Week 7, gets a good matchup against the Giants in Week 8, who, let's give him a little bit of credit, have looked pretty good the last 2 weeks against the Commanders and the Bills, but they still gave up a good enough stat line to the wide receiver 1 on the Commanders and Terry McLaurin. In the previous week, a good stat line to the wide receiver 1 on the Bills and Stephon Diggs. So I like Garrett Wilson. I know he's been a hard player to trust, not really due to him, but due to the nature of the quarterback position in this team and everything that's happened. But I still think Garrett Wilson is a solid flex option on a week in, week out basis, especially against the right matchups. I like him this week against the Giants. I like him even more in Week 9 against one of the worst secondaries in the league of the Chargers. But listen, coming off of his bye week, I think that he's going to have plenty of time to get involved in this offense this week. He'll be a big part of the game plan. I think he's just a player that week after week, you kind of look at him, everything that's happened, you're just not 100% confident. I think he's a solid flex option. The Giants, for the most part of the year, have struggled defensively and struggled against the wide receiver position. Maybe we're seeing that start to change, but like I said, still a good enough stat line this past week for Terry McLaurin against the Giants. Garrett Wilson, maybe not the highest ceiling, but I still think a strong start moving into Week 8. Next up, we're going to talk about Terry McLaurin, a player that I just mentioned when you're talking about Garrett Wilson. But nonetheless, listen, Terry McLaurin, 14 or more fantasy points in his last 2 games. He's had double digits every game this year, except for 2 games. And for most of you guys, you're probably starting Terry McLaurin no matter what. But I just want to give you guys some confidence. He's a really strong flex option, a good wide receiver, too, going up against the Philadelphia Eagles in week 8. And I still think there are some people out there who see a matchup against the Eagles and think, oh, I can't start my players against them. But guys, this Eagles secondary is one of the worst secondaries in the entire league. They've given up a tremendous amount of fantasy points to the wide receiver position on the year. They just got torched by Tyreek Hill, even though everyone gets torched by Tyreek Hill. But you get the point, right? Terry McLaurin had his best fantasy performance of the season in week 4 against the Philadelphia Eagles. So this is a home game for Washington. Going to be in a little bit of a better spot than usual. Don't get me wrong, this offensive line has a lot of issues. Sam Howell getting sacked a lot, all of that stuff. But Terry McLaurin is still going to be involved. This is probably going to be a game where Washington's playing from behind or doing whatever they can to stay in this game. So I do think that the passing attack will be here first and foremost, because we know that the Eagles are very good against the run. They've just been so soft against the pass. Don't be worried about this matchup. Terry McLaurin should remain in your starting lineups. This is a strong start for him as we approach week 8. Last, I'm going to mention Christian Kirk, who's the wide receiver 15 in fantasy football at the moment. Probably a must start for most of you guys anyways, but I'm looking at a lot of rankings moving into the week, and I can't believe how low Christian Kirk is. He's had double digits in every game this year except for week 1. And this Pittsburgh Steelers secondary is still a bottom 12 unit. I know they played well last week against Cooper Kupp for the most part, but Puka Nacua was all over the field, making all kinds of catches. And when you really think of the makeup of the Jaguars, Calvin Ridley is still that wide receiver 1 lining up, and Christian Kirk primarily is coming out of the slot. This is a perfect matchup if we're basing things off of last week for Christian Kirk. And regardless, Kirk has been extremely consistent on the year. Like I said, you take away week 1, he's been phenomenal. He's a player, especially in full PPR formats, who should be in your starting lineup every single week. I was huge on Christian Kirk coming into this year. He's a security blanket for Trevor Lawrence, has a great chemistry with Trevor Lawrence, and Calvin Ridley being on the field helps Christian Kirk at the end of the day, and I really think it helps him here in week 8 in this matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Christian Kirk, keep him in your lineup. Don't think twice about it. He is a must-start wide receiver moving into week 8. And that'll do it for today's video. If you guys did enjoy the content today or find it helpful, be sure to subscribe on the way out. This is all we do here all year round. Free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. If you guys are into that, be sure to subscribe. But more importantly, please get in the comment section down below anything that you guys need, starts, sits, trades, what wide receivers are you guys starting this week? How are injuries affecting you? Anything that you guys need pertaining to the 2023 fantasy football season, I'm here. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. With that, I will say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.